Alrighty, welcome to another episode of the U.S. Energy Podcast. We are focused here on the carbon series. Energy talks. We're talking energy transition. We got a very special guest, the CEO of Bakken Energy, Mike Hopkins. Thank you so much for being with us. How are you doing today?
Doing great. I've been looking forward to this, Jason. So let's get into it.
Man, there's so much that we need to talk about. Just a little backstory. Their project is the Bakken Energy Clean Hydrogen Hub or plant. Is that, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong there, but it's one of the largest in North America going in.
It is. It's certainly the largest project of its kind that's been announced in the United States as a clean hydrogen. And yeah, we use the term hub very specifically. It's something that's being used by the Department of Energy. It's a term that was used in the recent bilateral infrastructure bill. But before either of them were using it, I think we started talking about yes, there's a plant or plants in this project, but it's a genuine hub in the sense of a fully integrated hydrogen hub, meaning that this project will produce clean hydrogen, it will store clean hydrogen, it will transport clean hydrogen, and it will have various utilizations, applications, consumption of clean hydrogen, all locally or in the region. And that's what we mean, Jason, we talk about, it's more than just, well, there's a plant here. It's an entire complex, it's a hub, it's a fully integrated ecosystem.
Yes, and where you guys are deciding to put this hub is pretty significant in the fact that it's kind of right outside of Beulah. And Beulah is, not quite a suburb of Bismarck, but pretty close to Bismarck. And it's been traditionally known for refineries and plants and things like that. I know I had uncles that were welders and project managers that have spent a lot of time in the Hazen-Beulah area, if you will. And so the strategy behind Beulah being the headquarters for this clean hydrogen hub is the fact that you are basically repurposing the Great Plains Synfuels Plant that's there. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. In terms of the chronology here, we had, as Bakken Energy, made the decision prior to even really thinking about that opportunity in Beulah. We had made the decision strategically, Jason, to focus exclusively on the development of clean hydrogen production, the potential of a clean hydrogen hub in North Dakota, greenfield from scratch, looking for the right location to build that. And for, I guess, obvious reasons, if we were going to do it from scratch, we were thinking more up in the area of the Bakken, your hometown, Williston. That seemed like the logical place. Mm-hmm. And we, at that time, is when we entered into our exclusive strategic partnership with Mitsubishi, who agreed with us that for a number of reasons, starting with abundant natural gas, but also the geology of North Dakota, lending itself to sequestration of carbon and storage of hydrogen with natural storage resources. We both agreed this was really a great geography to be thinking about in the right location. And it was only after we had sort of started down the road of let's find the right place to do this from scratch that we revisited the Great Plains Synfuels Plant. We've been working with Basin Electric Power Cooperative for some time. And in working with them, we had taken a look at Beulah, the DGC, what could be done with this facility. And I expect we were one of many people that have come in and looked at it with Basin to figure out, what could you do with this? Because as you know, and I think it's common knowledge, that facility has been coming to I'll say towards the end of its realistic commercial life, not its technical life. It's not an issue with the quality of the equipment, and it's certainly not an issue with the skill set and capability of the 500 people that work there, but just the notion of gasification and producing synthetic natural gas in today's world is just not an economic proposition. So we started thinking about exactly what's there. And as you said, it's this petrochemical complex, and started analyzing it with our partners about, could this actually be a huge head start, both in terms of existing equipment, site, permits, and in terms of, the head start, like being able to get online. You mentioned 2026. Yeah, that's our target date to be in production of clean hydrogen. And that's probably, I'm going to say, 5 years faster than we could have possibly been online doing this from scratch, from
start to finish. Yeah, I'd say usually large infrastructure projects like that, you got almost a 10-year lead time,
it's 10 years. So we're 5 years with this, and it's purely, I'll say, coincidence, good fortune, but you've got these two great assets, and that's why we made the decision and thankfully came to agreement with Basin Electric to do this acquisition. We saw that there's these physical assets there that are a significant amount of the physical assets are exactly what you would want if you wanted to produce clean hydrogen at large scale. Like, everything there is big, Jason. So if you're doing this, you've got to have the stomach to go big, but that's what we wanted to do. So we're not afraid of that. We embrace that. And then the other asset that is very much part of this are the human assets, the human resources there, which is, you've got I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir with you. We've got an amazing group of highly skilled, highly experienced people that, again, are the type of people that you would want to have if you were going to be doing very large scale, very sophisticated clean hydrogen production, as well as continued ammonia production, which is already there, but in our case, clean ammonia.
Gotcha. So you got the workforce there, you got the infrastructure there, and then how about your feedstocks? How are you getting those? Typically it's natural gas. Is that correct? And it's coming from the Bakken.
Correct. Yes. So that is certainly our current plan and intention. So when we think of clean hydrogen, there's basically two types of clean hydrogen. You can either be doing clean hydrogen from water through an electrolyzer powered by renewables, or you can be doing clean hydrogen from natural gas, provided you do carbon capture and sequestration. Seeing the opportunity here in North Dakota, and again, I'll say, even before we got involved with the Great Plains Synfuels Plant, we had already made the decision that as a beginning, as a start of clean hydrogen in North Dakota, the logical start would be using natural gas with carbon capture and sequestration, for the reasons I gave you earlier, that you've got all this natural gas, you've got this geology that's absolutely perfect for what you want to do with the carbon, and your ability to then store hydrogen that's being produced so that you can balance supply and demand. So we saw it had these attributes. We also recognize that in the future, when the costs of clean hydrogen from renewables comes down, it's very high right now, which limits adoption. But as it comes down, we see that as like the next leg for North Dakota is if we build large scale clean hydrogen production based on natural gas, take advantage of what's there today, natural gas, the ability to do it at very low cost, the geology, all these things say start with natural gas, build out this infrastructure. Once we build out this hydrogen infrastructure, like transportation, like storage, based on the low cost of clean hydrogen from natural gas, then it's very natural to add in hydrogen from renewables also in North Dakota. Obviously, North Dakota is a great place to do wind power. Yeah. So a very logical, future extension of what we do will be that. So when we talk about a clean hydrogen hub, we don't mean a clean hydrogen hub, but that really means it's just made from natural gas with carbon capture and sequestration. That's just where we begin, and we're beginning in a big way.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And just a little backstory that we had talked about in 2015. Me and my father had hosted the Bakken Energy Festival in Williston. We had Travis Stritt as one of our headliners, and Lieutenant Governor Wrigley at the time was one of our keynotes, and Heitkamp and Hoven were both opening and closing messages for our event. And then we ended up pivoting, but it's just ironic, how full circle this kind of comes around. But
and we stole your name.
Yeah, well, we had owned it at one time, and then I was like, well, we went from Bakken Energy to U.S. Energy, so we felt that was a little upgrade on our part, and it's obviously pretty niche, and ended up working out for you guys pretty well. But that's it's just interesting to see how North Dakota is developing. And a little disclaimer, I used to work for Baker Hughes as a health, safety, environmental guy back in the boom days. And one thing that's been frustrating me for a long time is the flaring. North Dakota is the worst offender in the United States. Even Texas is more efficient per acreage. Colorado is way ahead. And I think it's either last year or the year before, we flared at 19%, and the national average is 4.75. So my passion is seeing that reduced or essentially eliminated, and not necessarily not shutting down the industry, but just fixing the problem. And that's what I care about, because people talk about CO2 and methane. I'm not necessarily worried about those as much as carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, dioxin. All these other VOCs that are coming out of these flare stacks. And so it's if you want to be transparent or honest, like, we're gassing out the people that are there, and that's frustrating to me. So especially when the industry kind of keeps everything within their confines, or their organizations, when it's like, hey, allow people from the outside the oil and gas industry to come in and hook onto these flare stacks, whether it's to create power, whether it's to use electricity, whether it's to mine Bitcoin. There's a whole lot of solutions right now that aren't being utilized because the operators, they want to keep everything in house, and that's, from a cultural standpoint, that's frustrating.
You're talking, Jason, about an issue that was the first issue that I encountered when I first came to North Dakota. I'm originally from Alberta, so that's my oil and gas background. Alberta definitely fits in exactly where you described, that 4% level of, I'll call it, nobody likes flaring, but I'll call that, that's the kind of flaring that comes with the industry in normal circumstances. When I first went to North Dakota, which I'm going to say is just over 3.5 years ago with my company, Bakken, and that was back when we were really just learning, looking at what's there, what could be done. The number one issue, the one that most people talked about, whether it was, talking to a waiter in a restaurant or talking to the governor, was flaring and is flaring. And you are correct that it has at times reached almost like unprecedented levels for the industry, including even like outside of North America. Like, it is a very serious problem. It's a very personal problem for people that are personally exposed to it. It's a problem for the environment. It's an economic problem. The dollars that are wasted by doing that are, it's hard to fathom. However, to connect it with our project, because there is a very important aspect of our project that goes straight to this issue of flaring. And that is, you mentioned like tapping into those flare stacks and using it. That is a thing to do. There are people that do it, have tried to do it. I'll tell you, if you work with any of those people or know the experience of them, whether they're doing Bitcoin or they're trying to do power generation or they're trying to produce some propane, a little distributed production, it's a very frustrating, a frustrating business, because you're literally, I think that those in the business call it like chasing flares, because flares at one place go up and down with high variability. The next well that's drilled pulls flaring from one location to another. And, if you're like trying to make a business using flare gas, it's a frustrating business when they're moving all around and it's highly variable. If you look past the symptom, like the symptom is the flaring, what's the cause of that? The cause of it is, and this is what differentiates North Dakota in a bad way from other oil and gas states and provinces, is North Dakota does not utilize natural gas in its own state. It does two things with it. It either exports it out of the state, but you're limited obviously by pipeline capacity, or you're flaring it. or yeah, worst case, I guess you're literally shut in if it can't do either. Yeah. So when we looked at flaring, and it's still how we look at it, as the fix to flaring is not chasing flares. It's certainly not shutting in production. You can try to keep building export pipelines all day long, but that's a tough way to deal with flaring when those are major. You talked about big infrastructure, yeah, time-consuming infrastructure. Yeah, new pipelines, expanded pipelines have a very, very long lead time. And North Dakota, it can be a boom place. You produce oil really fast. Your volumes can go up really fast, and all those volumes come with gas. It comes really fast. It just doesn't fit with a 10-year planning horizon for a pipeline. So to go back to what's the solution? The solution is develop the use of natural gas as a fuel or as a feedstock in North Dakota so that you're actually utilizing it. You're getting value. People like to talk, and I like to talk about value add. I think North Dakota has a really great reputation for value add in agriculture. It doesn't have a great reputation for value add in energy. You produce oil, you produce gas, and you move both of them out of the state. The opportunity here, I think, is to take this, this is going back, I guess, to the beginning of our conversation. You have this amazing natural gas resource that is not highly valued. And why not put it to not just a use, why not put it to the highest valued use? If you could take something that people, in North Dakota, I think most people wish you didn't have the gas. You'd like to keep the oil, but literally wish you didn't have the gas. If you could transform that into clean hydrogen, something that, Jason, everybody wants. I mean, everybody wants. Every energy company, every big trucking companies, shipping companies, the big refiners, the food processors. There's this incredible growing demand for clean hydrogen. And that's where we think our project comes in. We'll take that natural gas, we'll turn it into something that's the highest valued use of it. And in the process, that's your solution to flaring. We don't in and of ourselves solve the flaring problem, but to me, that's the beginning of the solution of the flaring problem. Is if you start thinking, sure, hydrogen, but there's other high value, responsible uses of natural gas that can be done in North Dakota. And as you start to do those things, to just utilize that natural gas right in North Dakota, whether it's as a fuel or a feedstock, in our case, it's a feedstock, you will see flaring really quickly go to what you would accept as, well, that's Texas, that's Alberta, it's not damaging to the environment in a material sense anymore.
Yeah, and to speak to your point, one of the things that has been frustrating to me is about talking about the actual challenges with industry. You're put into a box right away. Like you're just like, oh, you're against industry. Like, no, I'm not. I grew up here. Like my community was, transformed, by the oil and gas industry, and I have the right to say, what I feel is frustrating or could be fixed. And oftentimes the local politicians, they don't want to talk about it, because they got big interests at play, and then they want to stay elected. So from a cultural standpoint, in the Bakken, there is big challenges that need to be changed. And it needs to go around proaction as opposed to reaction. And oftentimes I found, it used to be the connection was, Williston to Denver, and then Denver to Houston. And then, Denver, once the bust, I guess, happened, a lot of people just consolidated back to Houston. There's still a decent Denver presence, but production is kind of down in Colorado, obviously, because of politics and among other things. But there's a big disconnect between Houston and Williston, or the Bakken, in my mind, culturally. The C-suites and the directors, they'll come visit there once a year and, see how things are going. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of participation. And we did concerts to try to encourage that. And from the operator standpoint, not a whole lot of participation. From the service side, the service companies that were local, that's where you get all the support from. And just to play, I guess I want to ask you these questions from, a family. Let's say you're my uncle and I'm playing devil's advocate for a few things around, hydrogen, because if hydrogen is everywhere in LinkedIn and energy news, and whether it's the silver bullets or if it's the hopium pipe dream, there's everything in between. And so that's where we want to, just kind of talk to you about some of the opportunities and the challenges of, if the solution is we can repurpose the natural gas that is being flared in Western North Dakota, I'm all for it. But there is some things that, around, well, let's say the use cases for this hydrogen. I think the best case is around agriculture and making ammonia. That makes sense. Just to give a little backstory, in 2019, the state of North Dakota almost declared a state of emergency for the lack of propane. And that is, bang my head against the wall type of frustration. Just being like, we don't have propane? Are you kidding me? Like, what are you guys talking about?
I had heard that story, Jason, and I've had the same reaction. That how is that physically possible that you could have a shortage of what you have in abundance?
I'm thinking fire every politician that's in North Dakota right now. I don't care what side you're on. If we have a shortage of propane, we are we are in an insane asylum. If that's the case.
Well, it's actually, I know that was a very serious issue, so I'm definitely not going to take it lightly at all.
Hard not to.
As funny in a bad way as it sounded when I first heard it, but it's actually a great example of what we were just talking about value add, about don't put yourself in a position where you have this great wealth of resources and all you do is move it out of the state. Sure. That is what happened there. You have a lot of propane. You just don't have propane as propane. You have it in the liquids, which is in the natural gas. And those liquids, like the natural gas, go out of your state. And then you bring back. So that's a consequence. You can say, well, we should do value add because we'll make more money. Well, yes, but it's not just that. It's things like this where you literally can find yourself in a shortage of something that you should have in abundance, but you don't produce it in your own state.
Well, North Dakota has a history of exporting everything, including talent and workforce. Like I graduated in 05, right? And most of my friends that are, I would say, very creative, engineers, whatever the skilled workforce, they have left North Dakota. And for whatever the reason may be, opportunity or more money or environment, whatever the case may be, North Dakota does a great job of training, through universities and whatnot, and then exporting that talent. So we have a history of exporting kind of everything, and that needs to change.
Absolutely. Well, you had touched on use cases, what do we do with this clean hydrogen and what makes sense, and make sure we're doing the right things with it. And you started at, I think, exactly the right starting point, which is, if you are not in the camp of all excited about all this talk about clean hydrogen, if you're more, I'll say, a traditionalist about what should you do with hydrogen, then you start with, well, what do we actually use hydrogen for today? Forget about clean hydrogen, just what do we do with hydrogen, the 10 million tons a year that are currently produced and consumed in the United States? Well, it's what you mentioned, ammonia. You make fertilizer with it. It's critical to that. You use it in refineries. We need refineries. We're going to continue to need refineries. They want to decarbonize. Ag wants to decarbonize. Agriculture is one of those areas, Jason, where it's, obviously essential and yet responsible for a lot of CO2 emissions. So where you can decarbonize, you want to. An obvious place is decarbonize a fertilizer, substitute clean ammonia for ammonia. And I guess the last of the, I'll say, current uses that no one's going to argue that, well, that's an opportunity for clean hydrogen. That's an opportunity to decarbonize, because that's what we're talking about with clean hydrogen. We're talking about decarbonization. So decarbonize what you currently use hydrogen for. I'd say even more so would I embrace what you said about ammonia, because part of our project part of what we're acquiring is literally an ammonia plant. So yeah, at the very top of our list about what are we going to do with this, we are going to be producing clean, carbon-free ammonia as fertilizer, selling it as fertilizer. We may even expand that part of our operations so that it may be a significant part of what this plant is capable of doing in terms of either clean hydrogen as hydrogen or clean hydrogen as ammonia, clean ammonia. Could be a big emphasis of ours. And there's lots of logic to that, given North Dakota is ag and like the region around it is ag, and it's a good market. Ammonia, as you may know, also has the benefit of transportation, cost of transportation. It's much cheaper to store. It's much, much cheaper to move around than clean hydrogen. So that's a focus of ours. The next level that you get to, and I'd say we're spending a fair bit of our attention on this right now as we start thinking about how do we make this North Dakota Clean Hydrogen Hub not just the biggest in the country, which it is going to be the biggest, at least in 2026. It will definitely be the biggest actual clean hydrogen plant. It's also going to be the lowest cost. And that's another important part. It will be by far the lowest cost clean hydrogen production in the country. And I don't just mean relative to hydrogen made from renewables. I mean hydrogen from any clean source, from natural gas with carbon capture and sequestration. The cost of our hydrogen will be really close to just conventional, whatever you want to call it, dirty hydrogen. So that's what we know we've got. What we don't know, and this is what we're working on, is what's the highest valued use of what we produce. So how do we get the most value out of this, given that we have all this volume, we've got this low cost. Yeah, we know we're going to do clean ammonia, but what do we do beyond that? Well, we're probably not sending it to a refinery because we're not that close to a refinery, and there's way more hydrogen we're producing than even one refinery would be taking. Food processing, that's not really the local industry there. So that gets us into what are the next likely applications for clean hydrogen. For those that follow clean hydrogen, I think they've heard that the proponents of clean hydrogen as part of a decarbonization strategy, people think about, well, what are the current sources of CO2 emissions that aren't likely to get decarbonized anytime soon by renewables and by batteries, energy storage. There's huge parts, obviously, of our US economy that have been getting decarbonized by renewables and energy storage. But there's also very significant segments that have not. And it's not just what we've been talking about, kind of the heavy industry, refineries, fertilizer plants, food processing plants. It's things like trucking. So one category that I'd say is not like way out there, and I don't think it's very controversial, is that if you are talking about decarbonizing the heavy trucking industry, the 18-wheelers, it's not likely, and I don't think people in the industry believe, the trucking industry, believe that it's likely to be done by batteries, the electrification with batteries. For the foreseeable future, it would look like, doing that, your truck would basically be a battery and there wouldn't be any room to actually haul anything. Right. But I think there is a case to be made. It's not like there's no controversy over it, but I think there's a case to be made. And there's obviously entire successful startups out there like Nikola Trucks that are building a business based on that being an important use of clean hydrogen. And we view that as that may well be an important application of clean hydrogen and one that we could be supplying. There's others that are looking at shipping as an area that can only realistically be decarbonized using either ammonia or methanol or
shipping. When you say shipping, you mean like maritime shipping?
Maritime shipping.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that when we look at, like, again, to go to like, how are we trying to maximize the value for us and for the state of North Dakota of this clean hydrogen hub? You got to start with the ammonia. You got to start with your own local area. Then you have to think about, well, what things can come to us that are accessible to us. They're not that far away. and I'm going to put trucking in that category, where any of these people seriously in the trucking business based on hydrogen, they're not thinking, well, I need all of my hydrogen in LA. They're thinking they need it all over the country. They need hubs that supply distribution. And in that context, North Dakota makes a lot of sense. In the same way that, if Toyota is correct, they're the largest car company. They've got the best-selling car. They're the last ones to really go with an electric vehicle. They're the first ones to go with a hydrogen car. Now I'm getting into the area where if we were having like a debate here between proponents of hydrogen and opponents, they're all over the car debate. They love the car debate.
For sure.
Yeah. I'm
hearing things in my head about like, oh, I know this person said that. This person said this. This person did that.
Yeah, it's like if you're active on LinkedIn and someone drops some statement pro or con about hydrogen cars, it lights up LinkedIn with people saying, this is the classic example of the hopium. It's a stupid idea. And others that think it's brilliant. I guess I look at it and, not getting into the debate part, but just observing that the largest car company in the world with the best-selling cars in the world has made the decision that their focus is going to be on hydrogen vehicles. Not, today, but over the next few years. And we have that in our mind that being smart about this, if you have this very large supply of clean hydrogen and you have this very low cost, it is possible, very possible, that at the relevant time, I'm talking 2026 and then beyond, because we're going to be in production for many decades, that there may be a network of hydrogen fueling stations requiring the supply from different hubs across the country. I said highly likely for trucking. I don't know highly likely for cars, but if it turns out to be cars, that's a lot of hydrogen.
Yeah, and I know the Toyota Mirai, that's their SUV truck, I think it is. And I think right now they're, if you're comparing the fuel transport, I think you're going 300 miles between a Tesla and, the hydrogen. It's $75 for 300 miles in hydrogen and $14 for the Tesla right now. But that's not really factoring in the economies of scale. Like as more R&D goes into hydrogen, those costs and those efficiencies, will likely go up. And the case that I think about is lithium ion batteries. Over a decade, where they went from 1,000, bucks to 100, over 10 years. And so is that kind of what you think is what's going to happen? Because a lot of people, for hydrogen, they talk about, it being expensive, and
so I think there's two things that I think about when I think about what's the future going to look like when it comes to clean hydrogen. One of them is, well, the future is not going to look like the present when it comes to cost, because fuel cells are not going to cost what fuel cells cost today. Electrolyzers are not going to cost what they cost today. That's sort of on the technology side, that, like you mentioned with lithium, but I'd say pretty much like any technology you want to talk about, when you go from demonstration and pilots to large scale, costs come way down. The other thing that happens in terms of costs coming way down is when you have a lot of investment come into an area, innovation happens and costs come down.
Yeah.
And whether you like hydrogen or don't like hydrogen, there's no denying there's an incredible amount of investment that's going into hydrogen right now. Yeah. So I take it as a given that investment drives innovation, that drives cost reduction. So the costs of the technological parts of hydrogen, those are going to come down. And I expect they will come down as dramatically as you saw with batteries, and before that, solar. The other part of it, which in my mind is equally important, but this is where it goes to just how much of a so-called hydrogen economy are we going to see? The other part of the cost picture, and I think it is directly relevant to your example of compare a Mirai to a Tesla. Tesla benefits from, there is infrastructure already existing, which is an electric infrastructure that makes the stuff work. Not the fast charging stations, those are coming. Yeah. But when Tesla came out with its electric vehicles, those would function, just with current infrastructure that's here. Not optimally, but fine. That is not true with hydrogen. Like, one of the issues with a hydrogen car is it doesn't function at all with current infrastructure.
Yeah.
You really could hardly go anywhere. Other than, I guess, if you have your own hydrogen supply at your own house, you can kind of go around in the area of your own home. But yeah, but my expectation, based on the amount of investment that's going into the development of hydrogen use, transportation, production, storage, is that you're going to see some version over some period of time of a distribution network for hydrogen across the country. And if you're, I guess if you were Japan, they are headed headlong into a full-on hydrogen economy. They're going to have a complete distribution system, exactly like we do here in the United States for electricity. It would be available for all purposes everywhere at all times in large scale. I don't know whether, we'll get to that. I don't know that anybody knows definitively whether that'll happen. Japan believes it, Korea believes that. Whether we get there or not, I don't know. But what I do expect is that we will, have some version of some distribution system that has a radical change, Jason, in the economics of hydrogen. If there's distribution, if there's plug-in stations for hydrogen, fueling stations, storage, distribution, that's what you really need to have a real comparison to say, okay, now I will compare the electric vehicle to a hydrogen vehicle when they both have the same basic infrastructure, and neither one has to have it built on its back. It exists and it functions. Then I'd say now you can do a real apples to apples comparison of, okay, what's the pros and cons of a hydrogen vehicle? What's the pros and cons of an electric vehicle? And we'll see which one, because I think that's what my expectation is. You're going to see both, and which one's dominant, I don't know.
Which one's going to outcompete the other, I guess.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to another question around, the hydrogen economy in North Dakota. Is like, we're making, it's going to be a big investment. I'm sure it sounds like a public-private partnership. The state is involved at some point, to some extent. So like, what do you think? Obviously the costs, in the next probably 5 years, you're expecting them to come down to make it more, I guess, competitive, because, renewables, they're coming down regardless, of breakthrough innovations or not. And so obviously you want to talk about the pairing and the collaboration between those, but is, long term, $2 billion, that's a lot of money for this type of infrastructure. It's kind of making a big bet on it though too, wouldn't you say?
It is, and it's literally the words I've used privately and maybe even publicly when I talk about this, is that when I talk about it, I am totally genuine in my unbridled enthusiasm for this project, in my complete confidence that, as I think said before, that we will build the largest clean hydrogen facility. We will be the lowest cost producer. The bet is just what you said. The bet is on what does that end up being worth, in the sense of what will people actually pay for this hydrogen and what demand will be there. And that's where there's no denying it's a bet. That's a big price tag on the bet. It's $2 billion, probably a little more than $2 billion in total capital for this project. To do what we need to do, which is to redevelop, to turn this facility from what it is into what we want it to be in terms of large, least cost clean hydrogen production. But I believe, and lots of people believe, that this is an intelligent bet. I think that the Department of Energy believes that this is exactly the kind of bets that people should make and that they should have confidence. I think the state of North Dakota agrees with us. I can tell you, there's tremendous investor interest in our project. There's tremendous interest by companies that are in the energy space that want to know how to get involved. Obviously, Mitsubishi is involved. They're our partner here. So I guess I feel good about my bet when there's lots of big institutions, lots of smart investors that like the bet. It doesn't change the fact that it's a bet, and there's no getting around the fact that it's a bet. I think it's a smart one. And I guess that's at the end of the day what entrepreneurs do. There's never a sure, if you're an entrepreneur, there's no such thing as a sure thing.
You're hedging your bet and you're mitigating risk. And you're providing solutions to some big challenges. One of the things that I see a lot in the hydrogen talk is the looseness of the word clean. Clean hydrogen. Did you see the Cornell study that came out and was talking about blue hydrogen? And there's a few things that are, I guess, intrinsic in this conversation around natural gas. When you convert it to liquefied hydrogen, you lose about 30% of the energy in that natural gas just in that process. So from an efficiency standpoint, that's a loss, I guess you could say. And then from a density standpoint, liquefied hydrogen is not very dense. I think it's 10 times less dense than gasoline, if you will. So the infrastructure to store it and to transport it are drastically different than what is currently being used. So like you said, that infrastructure is going to take a lot of capital to make a national network. So what do you think? I mean, it's going to take a lot of stakeholders, I guess. And you guys are kind of prototyping what this is going to look like, let's say in North Dakota. Are there other groups out there that are doing these things in, let's say, California or Texas, that you can think of are doing what you guys are doing? And
yeah, there are. I mean, I guess to go through this with you, I'd say that if you look at hydrogen just as a fuel, and you want to, or an energy source or an energy carrier, and you compare it to gasoline, or you compare it to the natural gas from which we're deriving it, I'd say it's very easy, and lots of people do it, to make arguments or be critical of it if you're doing that, like just in isolation of saying, well, I'm going to compare natural gas as an energy source to hydrogen as an energy source, and I'm going to show how it's worse from an energy density perspective or efficiency perspective. And I guess my answer to that, Jason, would be, look, if you don't care about carbon and you're happy to just use as your fuels gasoline, diesel, natural gas, then you would have no interest in clean hydrogen. There'd be no point to it, because if it's just being compared as an energy source, it's inferior. Its superiority and its value is in decarbonization. So that's really the threshold question. There's really it is the threshold question. Do you believe there's a need to decarbonize? If you
Absolutely.
do, then hydrogen is an important tool. Clean hydrogen is an important tool. It's an essential tool, in my opinion. There's other means of decarbonizing. It's probably a portfolio of tools you'll use to decarbonize successfully, but one of them that has a lot of unique attributes for decarbonization is hydrogen. Then you go to, because you touched on the Cornell study and, well, what is clean? And I think you've got people, I'll say, that are of the view that the only clean hydrogen is what they would consider the purest hydrogen, that is made from water. You use an electrolyzer. The electrolyzer has to be powered with renewables, and then it's clean. It's pristine. It's perfect. Green. That's the color they put on it. And there are certainly people in the industry and outside the industry that say that's the only clean hydrogen. Everything else is inferior. The Cornell study, which I'll get to, would be the extreme example of saying that other types of clean hydrogen are not just not as clean, that they're literally dirty or worse than the worst. So I'll start by saying green, hydrogen from renewables. There are very few examples of that. Most of them that are supposed examples of that still take grid from the, so take power from the grid as a backup. Yeah. It's difficult to be sure, to be literally carbon free. And it's, I'd say, impossible if you're including the carbon attributable to the production of electrolyzers. And, it's just not possible.
Energy intensive, for sure.
Yeah, and very energy intensive. And hard to do it purely based on renewables, unless you're going to also have batteries, or you're going to be connected to the grid. And then there's carbon associated with that too. So in the case of ours, I guess ours is from natural gas, carbon capture sequestration. Let me start with the Cornell study. The Cornell study, I'd say it's basically a study that looks at hydrogen from natural gas using carbon capture and sequestration, and makes a series of assumptions that are not impossible, but are the worst case assumptions the whole value chain through. They start by assuming methane leaks back at the wellhead, at the processing point. And I'd say methane leaks, Jason, that are what you would see in a worst case scenario, not in the United States, other than in some rogue producer somewhere that might get away with it for some period of time. But it makes this assumption that if you're making clean hydrogen, you're getting it from, I'll say, the worst possible producers of natural gas, who are having their gas processed by the worst possible gas processors. Then you proceed. So every step of the way in their analysis, and I believe they have publicly acknowledged that they made assumptions, and yes, for the purposes of illustration, they made the worst case assumptions. When you add up those assumptions, I think their acknowledgement was, if you did not make the worst case assumptions, but you made not necessarily the best case, but ones that would be more appropriate for an American company sourcing American natural gas from American processors who are using, as a clean hydrogen company, state-of-the-art carbon capture, not steam methane reforming, which is what they assumed, and we're not using. And most would not be doing that if they were a modern day clean hydrogen company. If you use realistic assumptions, they overstated the carbon emissions associated with what they call blue hydrogen by 10x. So I guess I'd say, yes, if you want to make the most extreme worst case assumptions, you could paint a picture of someone somewhere in Africa making, making what they were calling clean hydrogen in the worst possible way, using the worst technologies. It would be that. That's not what we're doing, obviously. I think what I advocate, and I think this is exactly where the Department of Energy is now, is to get off of colors. They're really not very helpful. Projects that are called green hydrogen are not perfect in terms of carbon intensity. And projects that make it from natural gas with carbon capture and sequestration, I would acknowledge you can have a very broad range, Jason, of actual carbon emissions. Forget the color, but if you're going to say, well, if it's natural gas with carbon capture, it's blue. Okay, let's call it blue. Blue can mean anything from capturing effectively CO2 emissions at a rate of 50%. So you're 50% carbon free, up to ours, which is 96% carbon free, because we're using autothermal reforming. We're using the absolute state of the art. And then we're tracking it all the way through the value chain. So I think that's an example of how these colors are not very helpful if you can have that kind of extreme. And that's where the DOE, I don't know if you picked up their Hydrogen Shot Summit, which was really good. And I was privileged to be able to be a speaker there, but it was really telling that not one speaker spoke of colors.
Talk about the colors, yeah.
Carbon intensity. And I'd say as someone who intends to be a very large clean hydrogen producer, I embrace the idea that, like, let's get off of colors. That's way too simplistic, way too misleading. We should have it rated like, gasoline. You don't have colors Premium, of gasoline. Yeah. It's an octane rating, right? Yeah, in their case, I'd say with clean hydrogen, if you're telling people you have clean hydrogen, get it rated. What is the carbon intensity? Have it rated by a government regulator. and have everyone's on a level playing field. Then I'd be happy that a hydrogen company making it from renewables with an electrolyzer gets a rating. It's not difficult to rate what the carbon intensity is. Are they getting 100% of their power from renewables? Is it mostly renewables and sometimes from the grid? What's the mix on the grid? Get a carbon intensity rating, have that on the label. We're happy to have ours rated. We think it'll come in around 95 to 96% all in terms of carbon intensity. That's how carbon free will be. The other benefit I think of that is, apart from level playing field, let the market then decide. For those that actually want to buy clean hydrogen, forget about the proponents and the opponents. Who actually wants to buy this? What are they willing to pay? Let them shop. If there is a product out there that's 100% carbon free and they want to pay what that costs, they should be able to do that. If they think if they think that clean hydrogen that's 95% carbon free, but is 1/2 or 1/3 of the cost of the 100% carbon free, if that's what they want, they should be entitled to do that. I think that's, not only am I advocating that, I think that's logically where the industry's headed. Is we're already moving off of colors, and I think getting a lot more sophisticated and precise about what it is we're making and what's its carbon intensity. Because at the end of the day, when I said hydrogen is all about decarbonization, well, then rate it on the extent to which you're decarbonizing.
For sure, I totally.
Because that's what we're selling.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And oftentimes, regardless of how you feel about something, the market dictates supply and demand. So regardless, it's like I agree with that rating system. And it's actually exciting to talk to you about this and hear what you guys plan to do. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that carbon capture and storage method that you just referred to?
Yeah. So in our case, we are using the process that we're using to start there. The process that we're using for the conversion of natural gas to clean hydrogen is autothermal reforming. It is the state of the art when it comes to the best way to convert natural gas to hydrogen. The traditional way is steam methane reforming. Steam methane reforming has been done for decades. It's actually the way that you make conventional so-called dirty hydrogen is steam methane reforming. The problem with steam methane reforming is it is virtually impossible, and this is why the Cornell study was talking about how bad blue hydrogen is they were making this assumption that someone would use steam methane reforming, which is not possible to capture carbon off of steam methane reforming at a high rate. It isn't. So it limits by definition, no matter what carbon capture process you use or technology you use, you are limited by the process. If you use autothermal reforming, which is by far the most energy efficient way and the way that maximizes the carbon that can be captured, then that's the right starting point. The reason people wouldn't use autothermal reforming is it's very expensive. And the main reason it's very expensive is you need an air separation unit. There happens to be a really big air separation unit
on the Great Plains Plant.
And there is. So there was no question that we were going to use it and add autothermal reforming and have state-of-the-art carbon capture enabled by doing that. And then we're using Mitsubishi, their technology on carbon capture. We're taking advantage of the fact that right in the immediate area of Beulah, there's great opportunities for sequestration, injection of carbon into the ground right there. And that's just another, I'd say, takes us back to why this Great Plains Synfuels Plant and this location is just such a gem for us when it comes to clean hydrogen, because it's enabling us to do carbon capture in the best possible way.
Yeah, that's it makes a lot of sense. And when I think of the states, some of their attempts to really decarbonize industry. You know, the one that comes to mind is, are you familiar with Project Tundra?
Yep.
And so
I'm not involved in it anyway, but I've read about it. Yes.
Yeah, that was one. You know, is a, you know, a big idea. You know, hybrid combined cycle. You know, carbon capture, low carbon intensity, and never got off the ground. But actually, I'm not sure if it's not operational, I guess you could say now. But I think your big competitive advantage is obviously taking over a facility that has the infrastructure, the permitting already in place, like we had talked about. And so we're going to be really excited to see how this develops. When is the retrofitting, I guess, taking place, or like what does the process look like of, you know, kind of ending the life of the Great Plains and transitioning, you know, into the hydrogen hub?
So we expect that the real actual, you know, retrofit, construction, conversion will begin in the spring of 2023,
okay,
and that we will be completed and in production in 2026. So the Great Plains Synfuels Plant will continue to function as it currently functions now and through the spring of 2023, and mostly through this conversion process. So our desire is to have the operation run as it runs with the least possible disruption and interruption as it transitions from what it is today to the clean hydrogen facility. In the same way that our desire is to retain everyone that wants to be retained, and I think most people are quite excited about what we're doing, to get for them to transition, you know, with the physical transition. We'll have the team that's there transition from doing what they have been doing to doing what we will be doing with clean hydrogen. You know, there will be, just from like an engineering technical perspective, there will be a break in time of continuity where there'll be an actual stop of what has been done and a period of time where the facility will, whatever you want to call it, go dark as we flip the switch over to the clean hydrogen. We intend to minimize that. You know, that'll be, I think, a period of intense retraining of people as we get ready to start up the new operation. And that's, so that's the plan in terms of the conversion.
Yeah, that's exciting. 2023, not too far away. It's almost amazing that we're almost done with 2021. we're getting through it, I guess you could say. But I guess one of the last things that I'd like to say from a corporate culture standpoint is, as a North Dakotan, I mean, we really need, you know, leadership in North Dakota to really support the communities that they're a part of. And, you know, it goes back to the events that I was talking about. So on the operator side, I've done probably 7 large scale events, and I've had two operators do come in at our basic level. One was, at the time, it was Statoil, which is now Equinor, and they're out of the Bakken now. And then, you know, Continental did a little sponsorship, but other than that, you know, the operators were pretty much non-existent in the communities. And so what I would ask is just Bakken Energy just support the communities, whether it's concerts or you know local ball teams, you know, whatever it is, because that cultural side of North Dakota is, you know, we say North Dakota nice, you know, like to where that's what we've always been known for. Very welcoming, you know, very hospitable, and a piece of that is missing now. And so I make the analogy that, you know, extractive industries, if they don't have a feedback loop to really support the communities beyond just the living wage, they leave voids in the community. And so in the Bakken, there's a big void that's there. And I hope to heal that, or be a part of that healing. And I hope that you guys can, you know, help fill some of that void as well.
Well, Jason, I embrace everything you say. And as a Canadian, I'm just naturally nice, I think.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think in seriousness, we do intend as Bakken Energy to be very much an integral part of the community in Beulah, and start working hand in hand with the people that are there, both working at the facility and living in the area, because we intend to do great things in that area, and we do it obviously with the people that live there. It's had a great history doing what it has been doing. We think it's going to have an even brighter future as a clean hydrogen hub. And we do, as I think I mentioned, we do not see this as just extractive or we're producing something to go somewhere else. We see it much more as Beulah becoming a magnet for those interested in hydrogen innovation, hydrogen research, new hydrogen industries. If they want hydrogen to study, if they want hydrogen to use in a new innovation, and they want it in large volume and they want it inexpensive, they're going to be coming there. So we think it's going to be tremendous. You and I, on another occasion, not on the podcast, should talk about what we could do together in terms of a community event, because for us, that's just beginning. You know, we have respectfully, I'll say, steered clear of the actual community by and large while we were negotiating with the current owners of the facility basin. But we have largely passed that now. So now is the opportunity for us to get to know the community and them, us. And we really sincerely are looking forward to being part of the community and working with the community.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I would love to. That's the thing about North Dakotans is that you're going to get a workforce that will just constantly work. They'll learn what you need. They'll do what you need, and it's becoming rare. Like if you look at what's post-pandemic or mid-pandemic, I'm here in Boise, Idaho, and there's help wanted signs everywhere, and businesses. If you're familiar with Hardee's or Carl's Jr. There's a restaurant closed down because I've never seen that in my life.
It's going on everywhere. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
And I feel like North Dakota is maybe one of the last bastions of the hard workers. And so I think you obviously got the right place to make the best go of this. And I think with the strategy and the approach, is there some disadvantages or some things, is there uncertainty? Yes, I will definitely admit that there is, but on the other side, that's what entrepreneurs do. They innovate and they adapt and they transform industries. And I think that, North Dakota is one of the best prototyping states. And there's a clear relationship between energy and agriculture. And I think that there needs to be a bridge there. And I think that's what you guys could potentially do, with your, ammonia and your fertilizer production, to where it's like, hey, how do we decarbonize ag? Because if there's one thing that everybody can agree on, it's that food is important. I mean, we can all, food resonates, especially good food. And so setting all differences aside, we come to the table for a great meal that's, farm to table, all those problems go away for a little while.
Fully agree.
And so
on that note, I'm going to go have lunch.
Yeah. I mean, I think let's wrap it up. And, thank you so much for your time. It's very enlightening, and best of luck in your project. We'll definitely be in touch.
I look forward to that.
And so until next time, you take care of yourself, and
thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you.